Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lean Enterprise Institute webinar, 4 Types of Problems, the Keys to Better Organizational Problem Solving, with our presenter, Art Smalley, a longtime Lean practitioner and author. I'm Chet Marchwinski, LEI Communications Director. On behalf of everyone here, welcome and thanks for attending. Just before we went live, there were nearly 3,500 of you registered for this webinar from every continent except Antarctica. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Next, please, Art. Let's review a couple of housekeeping tips so that you can participate in the Q&A. All the settings you need are at the bottom of your window. At the far left is the audio button. At the middle left is a chat button for communicating with other attendees if you want. At the middle right is the Q&A button for submitting questions to the presenter. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. We won't be using the raised hand function today. By the way, we'll archive this session in our webinar library at lean.org and let you know by email when it's posted. Access to the library is free and doesn't require registration, so by all means, help yourselves. Next, please, Art. In the meantime, you can deepen your knowledge of problem solving by getting a copy of the 4 types of problems. The book is designed to help you and your teams sort out the problems you face, avoid hammer and nail traps, pick the right problem solving tool, and sustain gains and solve problems faster. You can get a copy at lean.org/bookstore. Next, please. You can also learn from author Art Smalley in person at the Lean Summit, March 26th in Houston. He'll be training a problem-solving session in an all-day workshop on March 26th before the conference, and during the conference, he'll be doing breakout sessions on problem-solving. You can register at lean.org/summit 2019. Next. And now let's meet Art Smalley. Art was one of the first Americans to work at Toyota in Japan. There, he learned problem-solving at the historic Amigo engine plant from Tomu Harada, who led maintenance activities that created the stability for Taiichi Ohno's innovations in flow production. Back in the US, Art served as director of lean manufacturing at Donnelly Corporation and as an in-house lean expert at McKinsey & Company. He later founded Art of Lean, and he is a member of LEI's training faculty. Art is the author of Creating Level Pull and co-author of Understanding A3 Thinking. His latest book, published in October, is 4 Types of Problems. And now I'd like to bring in our presenter, Art Smalley. Art, the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chet. You covered my introduction for me, so I'll go ahead and skip over that. Just other fun stuff you might want to know or might not care about. Speaking to you from Cypress, California today. Married, got 3 wonderful kids. I got a variety of hobbies in addition to lean. I like to do photography, woodworking, reading, and I'm an active practitioner even at the ripe young age of 53 of judo, jiu-jitsu, and a Filipino martial art called Kali. So we're going to outline this talk today. Just jump right into it because we've only got an hour and there's a lot of material, frankly, to cover in an hour. We had some questions that have been posed in the past to this, so I'm going to outline the questions here, and then of course we'll address whatever real questions in addition you have to this at the end. But how does this link to the LEI Transformation Model? You know, why did you guys make this book? What are the 4 types? Why are you even proposing 4 types? What types of session does each one best address in my opinion there? And we'll go through the 4 types quickly. And I'll probably spend more time on the front end and the setup of this, explaining that. And we may have a follow-up webinar and go into more details on one or several of the types if you're interested in questions, point us in that direction. Let's start with the first question we had, though, even before the webinar came online. He said, how does this link to the LEI Transformation Model? And it addresses it right at point 1. There's the roof of the house, you know, the folks LEI and John Shook came up with some time ago, and it says right at the top, you know, you got to be flexible here, have a situational approach, value-driven purpose, and always ask, what problem are you trying to solve? It's a valid question. You know, it's an important one to think about. What are you going after? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you fixing? It's not as simple as just what lean tool am I trying to use here? How many Kaizen events am I holding? What training should I do, etc. You know, it's fundamental always asking that first principle question of what are you trying to accomplish here? What problem are you trying to solve? And it sounds really easy, but it's, you know, the easy things in life aren't always that simple. And I did some background research, even starting a decade ago, when somebody asked me an opinion of who I thought invented problem solving. And I go, well, I don't think anybody did. You want to go all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans and philosophy, or where do you want to go back to? I have no idea. The Egyptians, I mean, there's probably stuff before that you could say are elements of problem solving. What I tell everybody, and this is just my opinion, as I studied the 20th century in particular, look, this no doubt is a derivative. Problem solving, most of our forms of problem solving are derivatives of the scientific method. I personally don't consider problem solving to be the same as the scientific method. I got a lot higher bar that I equate with the scientific method. I worked in a scientific laboratory the last decade helping them on their problem solving and lean efforts, and kind of got schooled by a large number of PhDs about what the scientific method really is, with double-blind studies, peer review, publishing, and objective duplication of results by independent third parties. And I go, okay, yeah, you're right. We're not doing that. But I still hold that, you know, problem solving in spirit derives from the notion of scientific method and critical thinking routines. And the whole 20th century is a really, really interesting tour here. I kind of drew it on this S-curve map of a variety of people facing situations and coming up with unique tools that we're all familiar with today, whether it's control charts, 80-20 rules, 7QC tools, brainstorming, design of experiment, you know, it just goes on and on and on. And it's a fascinating look at, you know, various people approaching this topic over the 20th century and coming up with lots of really great things that help us today. And interestingly, there was a book published in Japan. Unfortunately, it's only in Japanese, but Toyota came out, some retired guys from Toyota who are very influential, general managers, big developers of the Toyota way. They came out with a book called Problem Solving the Toyota Way 2-3 years ago. And it framed different ways that Toyota solves problems. Yes, there's one basic 8-step method, but there's lots of shades of gray and lots of flavors. And we actually, John and Shook and I wanted to get this book translated. I offered to translate it for free just to get it out there. It's a neat little handbook. It's not a big book, but we couldn't get the rights to it. And John and I said, well, look, I already had a framework that I was proposing at the time we found this book. We said, let's go down our own path, come up with our own LEI book on this and see if we can help people in our own fashion and compete with our friends back in Japan and come up with something equal, if not better. And that's where we came up with the framework of 4 types, okay? I'm not saying it's a perfect framework. It doesn't cover necessarily everything under the sun, but I want to go through why we came up with it, where we think it helps, how it avoids certain problems we see commonly in companies when we go out and visit with them. And if it helps you, great. And if it doesn't, well, okay, hopefully you're doing great and moving on to the next thing yourselves. But in the following slides, I'll address a little more detailed, you know, why 4 types, Art, you know, why not just the scientific method? I touched upon that already. Why can't we just do it? Why can't we go out and do Kaizen events? Why don't we just, you know, tell everybody PDCA, kata, and be done with it? Or why not Six Sigma? Can't we use numbers and be real statistical, you know, sophisticated about this? Why not? I mean, those are all valid questions. And I run into those at companies, and you'll have your pet flavors and types that you'll no doubt like and feel good about, and less good about others. And I think I can explain some of that. So let's start with, okay, why 4 types? Again, this is kind of like the book that came out in Japanese, Toyota Problem Solving the Toyota Way, but this concept goes back to, you know, as far as I worked for Toyota in the started in 1988, and John Shook was there several years before me in Japan. And even then, we made a big deal out of, you got to separate between what we call the reactive and the creative. What I'm calling type 1 and type 2 are the reactive families, where you're doing some type of troubleshooting, dealing with the abnormal condition and problem solving it to the best of your ability in that minute, in that hour, in that day. And then you have to do true deep dive type 2 problem solving, of which there are several flavors, which get at the root cause, prevent it from reoccurring. And again, most of the 20th century techniques are around what I call type 2 problem solving and better routines around that, but not just those. There's a lot of type 3 and type 4. But you know what Toyota became famous for, in my opinion, was, again, the type 2, we called it gap from standard problems. And again, that's a flavor of what we do. And look, if you can do types 1 and types 2 well, and by no means is that easy, you're going to be pretty doggone good. But as Toyota points out, you know, even from our first day in the company, you know, customers expect better. year after year, competition gets higher, and human potential, respect for people. We all have this ability to think of better ways, more creative, interesting ways of doing things. And types 3 and 4 deal with the future, deal with creative thinking, going beyond where we're at, even if we're at 100%, and getting better tomorrow. You know, annual planning process does this to most of us. You're going to have to be 3% better. Olympics, the same thing. Whatever you did last year for the 100 meters or pole vault's great. Give me 0.02 seconds. Give me 2 more millimeters next year. You got to incrementally get better in type 3. And sometimes, again, the right answer is not just tweaking the process to optimize it and getting better, but coming up with an entire new solution space or something even better. You know, a better Lexus, a better Prius, a hybrid vehicle, or something entirely new. You know, the iPhone. The internet sure beats the heck out of DSL and old copper wires and dial-up modems and stuff that we used to deal with. You know, 5G is supposed to be coming, making the internet even better and brighter. You know, I'll believe it when I see it. But, you know, the point is progress moves forward, and you have to create new things as well. And as I stepped and thought back about my Toyota experiences, and I contacted a lot of the gentlemen who I respected and worked for in Japan who are now in their, you know, 60s, 70s, and 80s, mostly retired, I came up with the notion I thought it fits into 4 types. Okay? Again, you may or may not agree with this conceptually. I'm just telling you where I'm at, what I recommend to most companies to avoid getting stuck. And my point is, you got to be good at all 4. I want you to juggle all 4 types. I want you to hit the single, the double, the triple, be able to hit the home run for the maximum way to get success for your organization. Okay, I'm not going to advocate or champion any one of these. I want you to be flexible of looking at the situation, saying, I need this type of technique here. I need this type of mindset here. I better be able to flip into this mindset in other instances. And I'll make some analogies to that. Okay? Other factors as I came about this, because I was for a long time, hey, you know, I wrote the book A3 Thinking, and John Shook came up with Managing to Learn, and we articulated the basic Toyota thinking process, which I'll call a type 2, and you can shoehorn type 3 into that as well. But it's predominantly a type 2, gap from standard, you know, solve the problem. And thought that maybe that's, you know, that's all we need. That's what Toyota emphasizes in most of its basic training. But the truth is there's more than that going on in Toyota. Okay, it's not that simple. There's more training classes. There's more situational techniques and approaches we use in reality when you dig and scratch under the cover. And I started thinking, well, look, I've been doing some reading and other things have influenced me as well. And one simple comparison is why I don't want to go with one size fits all. I mean, you can do it. Don't get me wrong. I can play a mean game of golf with just the 7-iron. But, you know, I play better when I also use my driver and my putter, you know. I can do it all with one club or one technique or one framework, but I think it's better to be situational and at least have a couple approaches in your hip pocket. And one example of that, you know, I put problem solving up in the left corner. There's the old kind of superficial left brain, right brain analogy of how we think. One hemisphere is critical, one hemisphere is creative. And to me, problem solving is in the middle. Root cause analysis is very much about critical thinking. Defining problems is very much about critical thinking routines. Analysis, getting at critical thinkings. But you got to be creative on the solution side as well. You know, when you come up with countermeasures, corrective actions, well, what's a better creative way of doing that? And we've tried in the past. There's some trial and error and creativity that goes on there. And I'm a big fan of the, you know, the Edward de Bono stuff, you know, 6 hats, where you got to put on a different hat. He uses a different color per hat and says, get out of your thinking traps. Force yourself to wear a different color hat and get out of the box you're stuck in. You know, you got to think creatively. You got to be data-driven sometimes, but you also want to think about benefits. You also want to think about feelings and hunches and the stuff that we don't always like to talk about. At the same time, I was reading the book that won the Nobel Prize by Daniel Kahneman for the research by Tversky and Kahneman, and they came up with the phrase System 1 and System 2 thinking, and articulate quite well, in my opinion. If you haven't read the book, I recommend reading it. It's easy, fast read, very interesting to me. That we, as humans, are primarily dominated by what they call System 1 thinking. And that's fine. It's fast, it's unconscious, it's automatic, it's good for everyday decisions. Like when you're driving a car, we're just using that System 1 thinking, and we're just dealing with reactions, and that's wonderful. The problem is System 1 thinking is error prone. Even if you're an expert, you're a PhD, you can have people with 140 IQs and above, and the authors in their tests gave them questions which they would fail. even questions dealing with statistics and things, logic in their own fields, they could create scenarios where your type 1 immediate action thinking would almost be wrong. So the point they come up with is you need a system 1 style of thinking, which is great for most of your daily life, but we also have to know how to slow down, employ system 2 thinkings, which gets us out of trouble. It's much more slower. It's better for complex decision. You got to reason things out. It hurts to think. Our brains hurt when we think hard sometimes, but in the end, it's more reliable. Okay. And it's not a right or wrong. It's you need a system 1 and system 2 thinking from their behavioral psychology, and management point of view. And system 1 is what I equate with type 1. We need some kind of fast troubleshooting responses, triage, if you will, from time to time. But you got to have what they call system 2. And I'm putting my type 2, type 3, type 4 thinking into what they would call system 2 parts of the brain, where you got to approach it differently. The other things that were impacting me is a colleague named Sam McPherson. He may be on the call today, I'm not sure, listening. He asked me if I'd ever heard of the Kolb Learning Style Survey, and I had not. I thought every survey under the world, and I'd never taken this one. He had me take it, and it came up with some interesting things. And he gave it some clients, I gave it some clients, and we found out it's kind of a useful tool to predict what you like in terms of problem solving and why you often go to war with certain parties in your organization, why you have competing ways and different points of view. It's kind of innate in the way you approach problems and think about things. Now, the survey tool, I think technically you got to pay $25 to take it. It's a license copyright thing. There are downloadable versions on the internet, which are quasi approximating it, I believe. It gets into gray areas of legality. So, not advising you to download anything illegal, but if you're interested, you can Google it and find it, and probably find a 20-question version of it, which is probably fairly accurate. And it'll give you a radar plot of what quadrant you're in. And the quadrant predicts very well, eerily well, what kind of problem solving you innately like to do. So upper left-hand quadrant is something called the accommodator quadrant. They love to apply, learn by doing, and they love the concrete experience. They love the 3 Gs, go and see, get the facts, touch things, talk to the people. And by and large, they like to go do it. They just like, okay, let's go kill this problem. Let's go put it to bed. Let's just do it. They're the voice in the audience. They're the voice in the meeting room that says, let's go do it. Enough of this meeting stuff. Let's go do this problem. The opposite of that accommodator quadrant is the bottom right, the assimilator. And these are people who are often in quality control, Six Sigma backgrounds, degrees in math, statistics, or engineering, and they say, oh, wait a minute, time out. We don't even know what the problem is. You can't go running around messing with stuff. You just might be making it worse. You're just going to move the waste around or mess with the variation. You don't even know common cause versus specific cause. And they want to go collect more data. They're reflective observers. They like abstractions. Intentionally, they say things like, in God we trust, all others bring facts and data. And they don't trust people because people are fallible. Back to the Kahneman system 1 thinking, we're error prone. They realize that. They want to do a system 2 approach and deal with data. So those two camps often fight with each other and can't get along. The same true is for the other two, the bottom left-hand and the upper right-hand corner. The bottom left-hand is the converger category, thinking and doing. I like to think a little, 80-20. I like to be practical. I like to do stuff. I want to test it and learn it out, but let's not go too far. So they're the ultimate PDCA, quick PDCA, or kata, or something like that. Let's just have a cycle, PDCA or kata, cycle, anything. Let's just go do it. But let's follow a rule and have a general process and make some pragmatic 80-20 decisions here. There's a lot of people that score into that quadrant. They don't get along too well with people in the upper right-hand quadrant. People who score and test in the upper right-hand quadrant are divergers. They like to think of strategy. They like to think of, all kinds of things which we might sometimes feel are blue sky or innovation related or taking a long time. And the diverger crowd is right in the long run, but in the short run, you can't just sit around and do nothing. So the convergers and divergers kind of war with each other. The convergers want to do something now and optimize the process. The divergers say, hey, you guys are just moving around the deck chairs in the Titanic, so knock it off. And you get these funny little, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not funny, little warring competing factions going on in the company that I was observing, and say, well, how do I address all 4 of these? Because they all got legitimate points. And I'm a big fan of situational leadership. I'll get off this slide, I promise, but this is just why I came to the 4 types. The the model of leadership, situational leadership, which still holds true, in our day and age today and functions very well, is you can't just have one style. The style you employ depends upon the situation, depends upon the task, depends upon the learner, and there are times, and you have to constantly match your style to the needs of the situation and the learner. You might need to be highly directive, specifying exactly the what, how, and the why. That's what they call the D1, S1 match. You might be a level up from that and be coaching. I'm still going to control the way, but I'm going to give them coaching key points to help them unstuck on how to do it. There are cases where you might flip into a supporting mode and say, no, they're bright, they're capable, they can do it. I'm just going to ask the right questions and see how do you do it. And there's a whole bunch of cases on the left too, bottom left, where look, they are perfectly capable of doing it. I need to stretch their talents and abilities. I'm giving the assignment to them. I'm delegating to them. I'll check in and see how they do, but I entirely trust them. They don't need direction. And the point about situational leadership is you got to mix and match these four things, okay, to be an effective leader. So all of that led into why I came up with 4 types, and why I think you have to situationally, flexibly be aware of the people you're dealing with, aware of the situation, and the constraints of the moment. You can't always go for the home run, the perfect solution, unfortunately, okay? I would like to. But sometimes I'm going to be honest, my internet doesn't work at home. Here's what really happens. The kids come to me and say, Daddy, the internet's not working. And I go over to the modem and the connection box. I turn it on and off. And magically, 30 seconds later, the internet's working again. I have no idea why, but I do that routine 3 times a month, if not more. And, sometimes you do have to troubleshoot. We had a flat tire in my household the other day. We joke, it's an example in the book, not the one that happened to me, but Tuesday morning I did wake up to a flat tire. My wife needed to be up at El Segundo and Boeing for a meeting, and I was up at 6 a.m. I called AAA. They put on the temporary. She took my vehicle. I took hers to the shop. They patched it. Look, we're good again. I'm not ready to replace all 4 tires. I got another 10,000 miles to go. I have no idea why this hunk of metal got stuck in the tire tread. Okay, I'm not going to problem solve that. We troubleshooted, we triaged it. And sometimes in life, unfortunately, you're forced into type 1 reactive situations and problems where you kind of got to triage it, move fast. And yeah, of course, if it's serious enough, you're going to come back and go to the root cause. But the type 1 problem solving approach appeals very much to those just do it people, okay, accommodators who like to work with people, like to go after things now, troubleshoot things. A lot of first responders. I mean, I'm not putting this down at all. If you're a firefighter and you run into a burning building, my hat's off to you. If you're a policeman responding to an active shooter, if you're in the military, if you're in customer service, if you're a nurse, if you're working in the ER, you deal with a lot of pressures that force you to do things right now that buy us some time, save the day, or buy us some time to get on to what we need to do, which is the type 2. And this is part of the Toyota production system. I think if there's one of the 4 types that's controversial, it's probably this one. Art, why are you including it? Well, I'm going to go to my grave saying, look, this is part of the Toyota production system, and maybe we don't emphasize it enough, okay? So, look, it's going to happen to you, whether it's a flat tire or me. Hopefully your house doesn't get on fire. But look, if a house is on fire, guess what we're going to do? I hope we call 911. Hope the firefighters show up rapidly and they put your house fire out, okay? After that's done, we're going to talk about what caused the fire, okay? And look, that's a very important sequence of events. You don't always follow that pattern of type 1, then type 2. Sometimes you can jump straight into type 2, but often you have to deal with a type 1 approach. And you don't get to choose, is my point. I'm in the upper left-hand corner. That is the day that I was supposed to fly to Brazil and present at the 20th Lean Summit in Brazil, okay? My book came out. They were going to ask me to be one of the keynotes. That morning at 4 a.m., I woke up feeling as sick as I had in ages. Now, it's the 3rd time this has happened to me in 10 years. I knew what it was. It's diverticulitis. I have small pouches in my intestine. Food particles get struck in there. They get infected. High stress times, I think, exacerbate it. And look, they don't actually know the root cause of it. In my case, it's hereditary. I got good blood pressure. My resting pulse is 54. I wrestle every morning when I'm home. I work out with kids 1/3 my age. I'm not out of shape. This is something that my father had, his father had, and just goes on in our lineage sometimes. And we're probably more susceptible to it than other people. I eat high fiber. I eliminate nuts. I've done everything they suggested. You know, a type 2, maybe they can go in and cut out that section of the lining, which they actually did in my father's case eventually, but I'm not ready for that. A pain shot, antibiotics, and some other medicine, and I'm good to go. That day, I missed my flight, got on the next one for Brazil. We scrambled, still everything came off on time. That's troubleshooting. I have to face it. And the whole Takata airbag was a fiasco of bad troubleshooting and bad type 2 problem solving and bad product development decisions when you delve into it. But they exacerbated their problems by not being good at troubleshooting and getting things out for a fix and realizing the breadth and depth of their problem very early on, when they should have, had spares and replacements for us. Things happen. Great companies. You can be the star of the world one day. Melissa Meyer, a brilliant young lady, excellent, senior executive at Google, went to Yahoo as a shining star. And then one day, Yahoo had 1 billion accounts hacked. And then they later found out it was 3 billion. I was one of those 3. They had to go into troubleshooting mode. They change your password, do two-factor authentication, do a whole bunch of stuff to protect yourself because your data, your passwords are compromised. And they had to go into damage control. And sometimes in life, you don't get to pick and choose the approach, is my point. You're forced to go in front of Congress in this point and go on the defensive. And my sympathies are always with executives who have to do that in any industry, okay? Here's another good example, Apollo 13. Most of us probably remember it or saw the movie. It made the phrase, Houston, we have a problem, famous. And the truth is that that movie was more about troubleshooting than it was problem solving. For those of you that need a brief refresher, the oxygen tank, the number 2 in the service module suddenly ruptured when they're up in space. There was also then a damage to a valve in the number 1 oxygen tank, causing it to lose oxygen. And they lost oxygen stores, water, electrical power, use of their propulsion system, everything in 3 hours. Houston, yeah, we got a problem. And the movie was about the heroic efforts to abort the mission and get home safely. They did a variety of things to go around the moon, using the lunar module for thrust instead of the service module. The environment fell to 39 degrees. They just had to huddle together to keep warm. They didn't have a heater or set of blankets up there. Really low levels of potable water and food, so they had to ration. Dangerous buildup of CO2, and there's a funny clip I got from that in a picture next. They had to do a bunch of stuff on the fly that we hadn't done. We didn't have standardized work for this. I'll show you the Jim Lovell work instruction changes they made on the fly, and do these manual vital burn adjustments. And this was all excellent troubleshooting. In fact, in the phrase in the movie, and I forget the character in real life, but sir, I believe this is going to be our finest hour at NASA. And they did. They got the astronauts home safely. Great movie, very heroic. It's what I call a type 1 troubleshooting focus. The type 2 focus is, why did the tanks rupture? And that wasn't in the movie. That's kind of boring. You got to deep dig into the design changes that occur, find out some problems that happened at assembly, and the real most likely probable cause was that they put a 28-volt thermostat relay in when it was supposed to be a 65-volt. There had been a design change, changed on the drawing, spare parts were left on a shelf, they installed the wrong one, and this led to the situation that most likely ruptured the oxygen tank, at least in the scientist's opinion, the engineer's opinion who studied this, and they figured it out weeks and months later. It wasn't really part of the movie, but that's the type 2 approach of what really happened, what was the root cause, how do you prevent it from happening. And sometimes you got to do both, gang. That's my point. Toyota, I'll argue we do both. The funny example I talked about of troubleshooting with the CO2 buildup, we have to make this square box fit into this hole made for this round canister using nothing but these spare parts and duct tape. And they came up with a procedure for doing that. Jim Lovell, the commander, worked with NASA Mission Control on the ground, and on the right you see his handwritten notes of his changes to the work instruction for doing the movements around the moon. There's more pages. I just cut and paste 2 of them. And flying back safely and making vital manual burn adjustments. So they had standardized work. Guess what? They had to change all of it on the fly. Those pages on the right later sold, I'm told, in an auction for $150,000. So pretty interesting. And this is where I'm going to say, look, there is a flavor of this that goes on, and it's very effective in Toyota. We have condition-based, time-based, human-based triggers. The easiest way to explain this is the andon cord and the call for help system. Technically, in Japanese, this is ijo shochi. It's a better word. It's abnormality management. But in English, most people resort to the term troubleshooting, which again, I think is fine as long as you're clear about what you mean with it. But the point is, in Toyota, in a launch period, 24 hours, 5,000 people, you can have 10,000 and-on calls easily. You can't do 10,000 type 2 problems. You can't do 10,000 innovations. You can't do 10,000 Six Sigma projects. You can't do 10,000 kata sessions, 10,000 A3s. You can't do it. You don't have the time or resources. So what Toyota and every good organization does is practice their form of triage, responding to the problems of the minute at the local level best they can, solving them in the minute, in the cycle, in the hour, and going on from there and moving forward. And this is what you see again in their hourly production analysis board. There's only two things here, okay? The count and the problems caused. And you can assess an organization's ability quickly by looking at stuff like this and whether they've written anything and the quality of the writing and the thinking there. And I stole the term 4Cs and stole it. You can blame me if you don't like it. It came from defect reports that we used in Toyota. These are not A3s. They're 8.5 by 11 page reports that have the defect contents. We asked for the root cause, the 5 whys. We asked for the countermeasure. And the supervisor's job is to, in the next cycle of work, whether that's 1 minute or 1 hour or 1 shift, to check results. So a long time ago, I called it 3 Cs. I've since said, okay, to emphasize the check results part of it, throwing in a 4th C. And the important thing, though, is the quick thinking pattern and the minimal documentation with this. The truth is, most of the type 1 problems in Toyota are handled verbally. Okay, there's not a ton of documentation. So defect report is a special case where you would have something written. But most of the calls for work delays, unjamming machines, training of people are verbal, what I call verbal 4 Cs. We're very quick, very rigorous, and very efficient about it. It is not band-aiding or anything bad. And I didn't realize this until I started writing the book, that the 5 whys came out of a troubleshooting and 4C type of experience. It was in Ono's machine shop. My boss was there. The machine got clogged with a cutting chip passing through a system. I won't read through the whole example. Most people are familiar with it. And they came up with a recurrence prevention measure to put a strainer on it. Now, technically, that's not the best solution, okay? That is an excellent type 1, quasi-type 2 solution that prevents recurrence and was solved verbally with something akin to what I'm calling the 4 Cs. There was no A3 report or 8-step problem-solving project done with this. This was verbal. We're doing Ono, my boss who was on the engineering staff, maintenance people, and look, they'd seen this happen a couple times. So look, it happens a couple times, you start getting, agitated and saying, we're going to stop it from happening again. And this is where the term, the 5th why of investigation, was invented. And I like to emphasize, look, 5 whys and 4 Cs go together. You don't have to put them into a type 2 report. Okay, so look, off my soapbox, type 1, it's part of Toyota. Life is going to make you deal with it. Be good at it from time to time. Real problem solving begins at type 2. That's why I wrote A3 thinking. John Shook wrote Managing to Learn. It's why Toyota emphasizes the 8 types of problems, okay? You got to go after those repeating, chronic, troublesome issues that are gap from standard, and we don't know how to solve them. Troubleshooting, by definition, won't do it. Troubleshooting is that system 1, quick thinking approach. Type 2, type 3, type 4. You got to use different parts of the brain and think about it and go after these in a deeper dive that you've done in the past. Metrics indicate them. Hourly count boards might show them, weekly things might show them, but the truth of the matter is, most of the time, you've got a KPI staring you in the face or an angry customer saying this happened, why, and you don't have an answer, okay? That causes you to go into type 2 thinking mode, where these things recur. We got this doggone gap, I can't explain it. Oh, what's going on? And you have to say, I don't know. I break down the problem, I study it in greater detail, I get the facts, I get the data. I analyze the heck out of it. I come up with either a hypothesis or demonstrable root causes, data, cause and effect, and go after the whole, 9 yards of 7, 8-step problem solving or whatever flavor of type 2 that you like, okay? And that's what Toyota is most noted for. It's that funneling approach. I don't care, no offense, I don't care if you use 5, 6, 7, or 8 steps. You've got to have some kind of funneling approach that gets you to the real problem, the real root cause. Implement countermeasures, corrective actions, try them, see what works, check results, and you can only manage so many of these at a time. So like when I was learning this in Toyota my first year, I was allowed to do one of these at a time. You get later in life, you can juggle 5, half dozen, you know, better at them. But you learn the thinking pattern and you earn your stripes in Toyota, so to speak, by doing your A3 or your type 2 problem, start to finish, and knocking it out of the park and understanding it and proving you can execute the steps. And this is where I warn everybody, you better be careful. Don't get on too high a soapbox saying in the what I call the fill in the blank, fill in the box approach to problem solving, because it doesn't really work that way in Toyota. We got a lot of flavors going on. Yes, there's 5Y, yes, there's fishbone, but technically we put those in the logic family. You're just using words and logic to solve, okay? There's also frames of problem solving where we do one variable at a time. When I was there, this was called statistical quality control. I call it, in English, it's most often called one variable at a time. Six Sigma fans would think of this as process capability, where you change one variable at a time and statistically measure the difference and see the result. And there's flavors above and beyond that. We don't talk about much in Toyota because only about 5% of the population in Toyota goes through the training. And it's multivariate analysis techniques, advanced regression, and things like that. So Toyota's got a whole gamut of techniques inside of type 2 they employ. And this is one of my pet peeves. I go to companies and they say, well, you didn't fill out the box. You haven't done the 5 whys, or you didn't do the fishbone right. Well, depending on the type of problem, that might not be the right approach. You might be better off with a Six Sigma style approach and one variable at a time and measuring process capability. Complex stuff and process product development, you got to get the expert and do multivariable at a time testing. Otherwise, you don't know what you're doing. An interesting book was published in English recently. It's not, I don't recommend it because it's actually very hard reading and not well written in Japanese or in English. I got it in English and I thought, boy, that was hard to read. Let me get the Japanese. Maybe it's better. And the Japanese was equally kind of convoluted. But the guy who wrote it's a genius. Never heard of him before. Kakuro Amasaka, 35-year veteran of SQC quality control activities in Toyota. And he has 6 levels of training just for the upper level I talk about, the MVAT. And he goes over some of that in his book, The New Quality Control Principle of Toyota. It's interesting to look at. It's a very complicated book. But you'll see flavors of problem solving in Toyota that have nothing to do with the 8-step method. They have nothing to do with fishbones or 5 whys. It's more advanced than that. So it's just nice to know the universe of problem solving in my mind and see what's out there. And be very careful the type of analytical approach for root cause analysis you employ. And again, nothing wrong with the tried and true A3 approach, fishbone, 5Y, things like that. But that's just one technique. Don't force people to just only use one style of problem solving. I want you to be more advanced, more flexible in that. In the book, I try to go to some of that and share it in a little more detail. Because sometimes, look, the devil's in the details, and you can't tell. You can talk to operators all you want. But sometimes until you measure, you know, the CPK, the process capability, you change the variables one at a time. Sometimes you don't know, because in Toyota tolerances are so small that we're talking microns. You know, a human hair's 1/30th of a millimeter. You know, a few microns. You know, you can't tell that by human sense. And operators' opinion, engineers' opinion of what's going on are frankly useless. This is where they're right. In God we trust. All others bring facts and data. We'll measure and check and see who's right after the test. And that problem solving is very important. And I recommend getting good at types 1 and 2. Type 3 is what I call target setting. Kaizen is another way of thinking about it. And this became very popular in Toyota in the 70s and beyond. You know, the type 1 stuff, frankly, started in the 50s. Okay. And of course, they were doing more than just that. 1962 was about when they unveiled the first type 2 problem solving class, the steps and the analytic methods that I'm calling with the A3 reports and the type 2s. The Kaizen stuff, and when I'm talking about type 3, really took off in the 70s. And you kind of I can't help but wonder if, you know, it's important to have a solid base in 1 and 2 before you go to 3. So I do tend to see a lot of companies starting with 3 and not sustaining what they accomplish. And it slides back. Now, type 3, technically, and we've made this distinction in Toyota since I worked there in 1988, is there are times in life when you're fine. Okay, that's the dotted line in the middle. You're at standard. If you're below it, you're red. You got a problem. We call that Mondai Kaiketsu, and there's the root cause, and you got to solve it. But there's times where you're at that dotted line, you're fine, and we're just going to raise the bar. Competition raised it, management raised it, employee with a great idea raised it, customer raised it. And that's what I get about in the book, Toyota Kaizen Methods. And those employ much more creative styles of thinking. There is no one root cause. You're changing multiple things. Okay. It's also importantly about the future. Root cause analysis, type 1 and 2 are about how things are now in the past. Types 3 and 4 are about the future, how you want them to be. In Japanese, we call that arubeki sugata. Okay? How should it be? What is the ideal state or the notion? Okay? What should it look like in a perfect condition or better condition next? You know, you can think about that next week, next month, next quarter, next year. The time frame can vary, but what is next? What is the future? What does the next bar look like? Okay, and it is a different thinking pattern. It is a critically different thinking pattern. And the easiest way for the lean community to understand the analogy is like as a value stream map. You're going to draw something, and you're going to find a bunch of problems. Some of which are systematic, and frankly, in here there's going to be a bunch of embedded type 1 and type 2 problems, but maybe not so much. Maybe your value stream is working fine. You're just saying next level. That would be a type 3 system approach. How do you shorten the lead time? How do I make this better, even if there's no problem, right? How do I tackle the wastes that are there and make things better, faster, cheaper, more productive, whatever flavor you're going after? And this thinking is powerful. Frankly, it's what drove Toyota to such heights over time. Long before I worked there, these are stamping presses, supposed to be pictures of stamping presses. They were dedicated. They stamped part A or part B or part C. Low utilization, long changeover times, complete waste of resources, wasted capital, operators standing around. Took 4 or 5 hours to change over a stamping die. And in the early days, that was a problem. But by 1962, again, 3 years before I was born, Toyota's company-wide average for die change time was 15 minutes. And they had hundreds of machines by then, in a couple factories, a couple shops. Well, at 15 minutes, they didn't know it, but they were already world-class at that stage. Nobody else was near that benchmark. And it's just amazing to me that somehow they still, from 1962 to 1963, they took a minute out every year. You're world-class, and you're still like trying to take that 0.10 second, 1 millimeter for incremental small improvement to be better. Well, your competition's still back in the hour range. And it's flattened off since then. There's, diminishing returns, everything sets in. I don't think setup change times on average have been better than 3 minutes. Maybe they're averaging a minute now. I don't know, here in 2019. But the 98% of the reduction was done during this period. And it's just flabbergasting to me that even when they were world-class, they were type 3 thinking every year, ring out 1 more minute. So I'm going to summarize target state thinking that just realize there's often no one root cause. You're fixing multiple things. You got lots of problem points, fixed points, creative ideas you're going after to do things better somehow, some way. Right? Creativity is your friend. Don't get boxed in. The fourth type of problem is the most powerful. You don't see much written about this from Toyota, but they do have sections devoted to it. And, innovation is the drive. Making a new vehicle, making a new type of car, making a new type of process. That's what keeps you in business the long run. I mean, I can argue you can be good at 1, 2, and 3. You still may go out of business. If you think of the 50-year period, the 25-year period, for example. If you're just good at 1, 2, 3, you're incrementally solving your problems and getting ahead of the competition. 4 is where people jump you, leapfrog you. Toyota was a very good company when I worked there, but they were known as a small car and truck company. And then the Lexus division came out in the 90s and took the company to another level. 80% of the profits today come from the Lexus division. They have a great problem. You make 20 billion or 15 billion in a year. 80% of that comes from one division. Okay, it's a problem. That's a nice problem to have, though. And it was only because AG Toyota and certain groups were adamant they had to have a premium product compete with the Americans and the Germans to round out their product family. And look, there's many different ways to think about it. Toyota does not have the box on this. In the chapter on the book, I go through the 10 types of innovation. I draw out the importance of design thinking and what it has in common with Toyota styles of thinking. There's Durward Sobek's contribution on set-based design and things like that and product development they do. And I try and get the similarities across while also pointing out the key differences from the other types. So again, I think type 1 and type 4, I don't think too many people debate me there, that troubleshooting is not the same as innovation. Yeah, a lot of things like testing and exploring and thinking that you can argue are overlapping, but troubleshooting a process doesn't produce the next great innovative product. It might have a breakthrough, but your organization's success, if you want to think about this over the 10, 20-year horizon, is going to be driven by type 4 and what you can do next with it in terms of vehicles and an uncertain market, uncertain environment where you don't exactly know what's legislative landscape going to be like, the political landscape, or the environmental landscape, or the consumer landscape. You don't always know. So you better be flexible in product development and stay out there. The diverger types are right in that yard. Don't just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. So that is why I came up with the 4 types. It mirrors situations I see in many companies and where they struggle and try and do too much in one type. It also very much mirrors my personal experiences, Toyota Japan. I argue we did all 4. You may argue all 4 of those are subset of your favorite style of thinking. That's great. That just may be your learning framework condition versus mine. My hopes is that this gets you unstuck and out of pointless arguments and increases your ability to think nimbly and agilely about different situations you face in your organizations. Not you per se. When I say you, frankly, you're the consultants in your organizations or the leaders. I want you to think of the entire population of the company you have. Because if you're listening to this webinar, you're probably in the top couple % of your company in terms of understanding lean thinking, problem solving, and things like that. I'm talking about the entire bell curve of the population who can and does need to be involved in making their day better some way, somehow. And we all do that with type 1 thinking in Toyota from the day we start. You graduate to type 2, type 3. There's always opportunities for type 4 open-ended thinking. They don't have to be large. They can be small. And the end result of that, I hope, will make for a better landscape for you and your organizations. So I rushed through that a bit, but I wanted to leave 15 minutes or so for for questions and answers, things I didn't explain well, or things that may have occurred to you and you just wanted to ask. So Chad, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Art, thanks a lot. Great job. A lot of good questions coming in while we're loading them up. I just wanted to remind everyone that before we begin the Q&A, to visit lean.org to access our webinar archive and all the other practical resources that are there, many of them free. And while you're there, check out the agenda for the annual Lean Summit set for Houston, March 27th to 28th. It's all at lean.org/summit 2019. And by the way, Art is doing a pre-conference workshop there and learning sessions on problem solving during the conference. And now let's get to your questions. Art, there were several questions. People wanted to know, they were really curious if you could repeat the name of the book. I believe it was Kahneman's book in the beginning.
Oh, yeah. So the book is actually titled Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow.
Okay. And there are also some people wanted to know right after that, you talked about a survey.
Okay, Kolb, K-O-L-B, Kolb Learning Survey. So Lieutenant Colonel Special Forces Sam McPherson introduced me to it. They employed it in Special Forces to see about different thinking patterns and could you predict who was going to be successful in their Q course.
Well, Sam's a first responder, so he was in there.
Yeah. So again, and he and I used it in a class workshop we once did together, and it immediately predicted who ran out of the class and tried to do something, who said, no, we got to stop and collect data, who went off in the corner at the whiteboard and said, we better think of a new strategy, and who just said, look, let's 80-20 this and put it in 8 steps and go solve it. You know, you could find all 4 categories of the class right away. And it's not right or wrong. It's just as a consultant and leader, you better realize how they're thinking and how they're going to react. And their approach may be right, by the way, you know, but sometimes their approach may be at odds with somebody else or may not be the right approach for the problem. It's just like situational leadership.
Okay, Don wants to know, for many people, when we use the phrase problem solving, their minds go to type 1 or 2 problems only. It is not natural for them to go to the other techniques. So do you have any suggestions for how we diffuse this, or how we counteract that in companies and get people to think about the other types?
Yeah, it's actually a problem. A language, you know, affects culture. And what you call it automatically determines how you start thinking about it. And Toyota today uses the term Kaizen. You know, the Toyota way is respect for people and Kaizen, so to speak. So they've gone with the Kaizen term, which is technically a type 3, type 4 approach, open-ended. But what you start learning in Toyota is 1 and 2. You know, I'm on the line. My first week on there, I'm on the line. I'm not meeting cycle time. I'm pulling the end-on cord, getting coached, you know, trying to fix the next cycle, or I make a defect. We're troubleshooting that together quickly, and then you learn the 8 steps. So when you say problem solving, yeah, stereotypically, the history of problem solving in the US is type 1 and type 2 and most of the Western world. But then as you go back to my S curve, you know, and the different things that have come up, well, you got Alex Osborne in there and his creative brainstorming routines. And his book was called Creative Problem Solving. And you got this crazy Russian guy who came up with a theory of inventive problem solving. He's a mad genius, you know, didn't become known to the West until the 60s. And it's called TREES, I guess, it's pronunciation, but in English it's kind of TIPS, theory of inventive problem solving, who argues that problem solving follows patterns for solution space. And you come up with the people who are design thinking routines with their empathy. And I think that's where the framework of the 4 types, and you can say, well, the 4 types are 2 problems, 2 Kaizens. Yeah, I guess I could have called it the 4 types of Kaizen, but I thought that muddied the water and used the Japanese word. You know, 4 types of approach was just too banal. But I think the framework, once you understand it, and most people can grasp it in very, 60 seconds, a couple minutes at most, embodies several types based upon the situation. And it goes back to me of under the bar, over the bar, caused gap or created gap, which I can't find the person to give credit to. I've asked Isao Kato and a bunch of people in Japan this a million times. They can't give me a person to credit for it. We just had this intellectual distinction between cause versus created, what I'm calling 1 and 2 on the cause side, and created 3 and 4. In some way through terms or graphics, you got to help people grasp what I'm calling the 4 types in a way that works for your situation and language.
Okay. Francis is asking how artificial intelligence and big data impact problem solving. What's your opinion?
Yeah, again, I don't know enough about that field. I think the big data collection, anytime we're being analytic about stuff, scrubbing more data, coming up with stuff, it kind of, there's one flavor of AI where they're just crunching the numbers faster. So if you think the computers beating the humans in chess, the grandmasters can't compete with the computers anymore, because the computers can out crunch you in terms of scenario planning. But a lot of chess is also creative, and the masters had an angle of competing against the computers for a while because they could do creative, unpredictable things. But AI is getting to the point where they're actually, they're doing unpredictable things that throw us off now. The computers and the adaptations, from what I'm reading about AI, it's pretty scary, and it makes me wonder: are they capable? Can we make them capable of the creative thinking routines? And then, gee, what happens to all of us when the Skynet when that happens?
Here's a.
I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I don't have the name on this. It came in through the chat, but it's simply why not just use Six Sigma?
Yeah, so that's a lot of people. The people that come up with that are very strong, usually in the Kolb survey of the bottom right-hand quadrant, because they like facts, numbers, and data. And I can put all 4 types under Six Sigma. I can put all 4 types under PDCA. I can throw homage to Mike Rother and say all 4 types are under Kata. It tends to be, driven by your framework and the way you see the world. And I don't mind if you look at the world through Six Sigma, okay? But other people don't look through it that lens, is my caution. The opposite of Six Sigma, the people who don't want to talk data. They want actual objects, operators, they want to go do now, okay? And you're going to have to think about doing it. And type 1 troubleshooting, you cannot employ Six Sigma, the steps of it, and collect data in a 60-second troubleshooting routine with the andon cord. That's why I'm saying you can't just use it. Six Sigma is a perfect type 2 approach. And in particular, it's what I call type 2, flavor 2 of analytic problem solving with data. But when you pull the andon cord and you got 60 seconds before the next engine comes at me, you're not going to fill out the steps of DMAIC or go collect data and measure variation. You're going to see why was Art late on the last cycle? Why did Art forget the gasket? After the fact, you can put that into a deep dive, type 2, any flavor you want. But sometimes with the flat tire we had the other day, I'm just troubleshooting that.
Right. A couple of questions on, I guess they're training related. Do you recommend teaching one method of problem solving like A3 thinking and then going to, setting that as a standard and then using, throughout the company and then going on to the others?
Basically, yeah. And that's debatable, by the way. But I would say having, whether it's DMAIC or, Six Sigma DMAIC or Toyota 8-step or A3 or managing to learn, I think what Toyota does, and this could be wrong, I'm just relating what Toyota does, is they get you into the company for a year and they start making you work your type 2 problems and really coach you and drill you hard on those, because type 1 you're going to get good at situationally. You're going to learn on the job type 1 troubleshooting. We'll make you better at it with the coaching points and the things, but it's informal. Type 3, I think you should be better at type 2 before type 3. I can argue it the other way. But I think a strong base of type 1 and type 2 makes type 3 solution spaces, real Kaizen, stick better. And they're more likely to succeed in the long run. So yeah, I tend to fall into the court, and there's no science supporting this, that just what I learned, what I experienced at Toyota and what I like to do with clients is type 2, and then I can branch into type 1 or type 3 from there. But let's really get type 2 buttoned down and done well. But I will say, I worked in a paper mill not too long ago for a year, and basically they had Six Sigma. They were Six Sigma, so we kept them in the Six Sigma broach. All we did was add type 1 problem solving, and we sent their performance through the roof. They did not change their Six Sigma project standard or style, but we implemented good troubleshooting, and all their short breakdowns got done faster. Employees got more involved, and they on a flat sales mix, they blew their EBITDA and operational performance out of the water just by typing. I was shocked.
They were going through the whole DMAIC process for problems.
Yeah, but everything was big DMAIC. Everything was black belts, the master black belt and the black belt, and it was months to resolve a problem and big dollars behind it. And good, you keep doing that, 100%. I bless that. But meanwhile, they had all these small, I call them paper cuts. I go, you guys are bleeding to death from all these little paper cuts and doing nothing about it. And we married the two. We got both going. They were much stronger. Okay.
What is the correct way to start with type 1 and 2? Engineers, supervisors, or at what time do you involve operators in this?
Well, again, I'd have to know more about the situation. We're always cautious about giving advice over phones and webinars without seeing, so I can just give dumb advice. But I like to involve, you can do 1 and 2 in parallel with the supervisors and the teams and the boards if you do a good job of it. I see companies doing a lousy job of this, but if you put up these boards and do a quick, an hour by hour check, you don't have to do the investment and expensive and-on system. But if you do a good job of hourly counts or condition boards, and sometimes you got to get creative with these, you can invoke the language of the 4 Cs, or some of my companies use a small 4C sheet, very, very, very tiny, and make people solve these. Our rule is it's got to be done, in something in that shift. The longest we ever give is 72 hours. I don't like to give that long, but you have to make the countermeasure within the 72-hour period. And okay, if it's worse than that, of course, I'm going to kick it up to a type 2, whether it's 8-step or Six Sigma or whatever your flavor of type 2 problem solving is. But we can get an awful lot done with just good type 1 problem solving and the hourly boards to the people. If it's hard, you triage it to the engineers. Of course, if it's harder, you got to triage it and say that's a type 2 and goes to the appropriate resource or team.
Okay. Art, this will have to be the last one. We've got, Effie wants to know if you've got any examples in your book for service organizations.
We kept it generic because it just, what I kind of do is establish the pattern, and then I let the copycats come out and customize it for their area. Because if I make a service example, I'm in the unfortunate corner of, do I do a manufacturing example or a service example or a healthcare example, or I work, in the national laboratories, or I do the process field, and I can't do justice to all of them. So I try and keep it basically abstract enough that everybody should be able to understand it. And now you got to come up with the follow-up work in your area. The derivative, you could write the 4 types of problem solvings in service industry, and like I'll bow down and clap. Like, please go do it, because I'm probably not going to have the time, and I'm not having the best examples for everything. I can't do healthcare and service and manufacturing and laboratories and process industry. I just jack of all trades, master of none. You know, if I try to do that, so I try and get the basic concepts across and say, look, you on the phone, you're my peers, you're the leaders for your areas here, not me. You gotta take it and try and figure it out and come up with the examples for your area. Be glad to try and help you with that, but you know, I'm not that much smarter on the bell curve than the people on the phone on the webinar here, and you're going to know your situations better than me. So I'd encourage you to map your examples to it and see what happens.
Okay. Well, Art, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time.
I got all day. Wait.
You're just getting started, I know.
Just getting started.
But thanks. It was a very enlightening and helpful discussion about problem solving. There's a lot of good questions that are left. So I want to thank everybody out there for joining us today and sending in such good questions. We're going to archive this webinar at lean.org and let you know by email when it is posted. There will also be a link if you didn't get the PDFs, you'll be able to get those. Art has generously agreed to answer the questions we couldn't get to. So he's going to, we'll select the ones that reflect the top issues that are on your minds, and we'll let you know when those are answered and posted at lean.org. Once again, thanks for attending. On behalf of Art Smalley and everyone here at the Lean Enterprise Institute, we wish you continued success in your lean journey.